Now, today I want to talk about a very controversial topic, especially when it comes to the history of ancient Egypt. I welcome you to my YouTube channel where I explore ancient texts, and the ancient texts I explore in this channel are those that have been around for thousands of years. And in this video, I'm going to talk about something that is covered in a book that was written probably 2,500 years ago by an historian who is often referred to as the father of history. That is Herodotus. Now, Herodotus wrote a book that is titled Histories. Is a well-known book. It's a book that is often mentioned when we're talking about history of ancient, mostly ancient Persia, ancient Egypt, um, ancient Greece, and generally that part of the world. Anyway, if you have not subscribed, subscribe so that you not miss any of the videos that I publish. Now, today, as I mentioned, I want to talk about ancient Egypt, and the question I'm going to focus on is what was the race of the ancient Egyptians? This is a very controversial topic, by the way. And a few months ago, I did a video. It wasn't really about the race of people, of the race of the ancient Egyptians, although it talked a lot about that. I was talking about something that Herodotus mentions about a tribe of people found in the region we know today as Georgia, and they were called the Colchians. And he said that if he asked around, and he was told that the Colchians were, or anyway, I'm going to go into details about that. Now, somebody left me a comment. It shows how controversial this topic can be. Somebody left me a comment under the video reading this or saying this: the 18th century dynasty of Egypt has genetically been tested, and this was 2,000 years before Herodotus, and they were all Caucasian. So he says there is some information out there that the bodies of the kings of ancient Egypt who lived 2,000 years before Herodotus, which makes it maybe 4,500 years from today if you count backwards. And this person who left me the comment was basically saying the remains of those kings were tested, and it was found that they were Caucasians. Now, I can't argue against that. I can't say that there is evidence, or I can't argue to say that they are not correct to say that, or I can't argue to say that I know of this evidence. I have never heard of it, and I can't say it doesn't exist. Most likely it does, or it does, I don't know. But again, I have to mention that when it comes to history, many things can happen. I might want to know who did the DNA, when was it done, especially who did the DNA, because there are many things that can happen. But I'm not saying there's anything wrong with that evidence if it really exists. But today I want to go back to that topic, and as I answered the person who wrote me the comment, this channel is not about anything, but just what I find in the books that I read, the ancient books mostly. So everything I share is from these books. That does not mean the person watching my video should understand that, so that they don't, for example, now tell me, oh, there was DNA that was that. Because this channel is not about trying to seek other information. Sometimes I do that, but my primary focus is always on the narratives that I find in the books that I read. Now, what was the race of ancient Egyptians? Now, here I'm going to look specifically at what Herodotus tells us. First, I need to point out that Herodotus does not categorically come out and tell us, oh, the ancient Egyptians were of this race. Because when you read Herodotus' book from the beginning to the end, you come to the conclusion that the ancient people, the skin color wasn't something that was so important to them. You get the impression that it was more of your tribe and nationality I mean the Commonwealth, than just how you looked. Of course, Herodotus does describe to us how different people he encountered looked, but you get the impression that it wasn't as important to those people as it was to us, especially maybe 100 years go back from today. People were so much fixated on the color of the people, and to them that the color of your skin and the nature of your hair maybe at some point became so important because it was used to mean something about your social status and things like that. So, but when you read Herodotus' book, that's not the impression you get. So I need to put that out there. Now, I also need to mention this before I even go into reading parts of Herodotus' book that I find to kind of like give us a sneak peek into the race of Egyptians, or how, let me say, the skin color and maybe the nature of their hair. And there's a reason I'm choosing those words like that. I need to point out this, that ancient Egypt, as Herodotus himself says it in the book, is a region or a country that was located, or is still located, at a very unique place on earth. This is a land that is very fertile, that is on a valley of a major river Nile. There were very few places on earth, or there have been very few places on earth with such kind of environment, of convenience, of consistency to supply food to population. So the people who settled on that land, they settled there for a reason. It was convenient to produce food and to build a settlement, basically. Now, throughout history, for thousands of years, often when we read history, or we hear of ancient Egypt, or Egypt in general, we always have this assumption that it has been the same people who have lived on that valley. But when you read history keenly, then you realize that might be a misconception. While that place has remained occupied for maybe 10,000 years, who knows, the type of people who've come to that land over time have been different people. Because yes, we have the ancient Egyptians, we are trying to figure out who they were, but at the same time, you have to realize that that land was conquered so many, or has been conquered so many times by so many different people. At one time, it was conquered by the Nubians, who are to the south of Egypt. At one time, the Ethiopians conquered that land, and they ruled. In fact, when you read Herodotus' histories, it's like the Ethiopians ruled ancient Egypt for like 300 years. Very long time. Think about it, 300 years, something like that. I might be wrong on the actual number, but it was quite a while. It was a very long, it could be 200 to 300 years or something like that. Persians came under Cambyses, and they conquered that land, and they kind of like settled there, even though they kind of like settled there. And it's possible that if you start with the Nubians and the Ethiopians, when these people came and conquered this land, it's not just the soldiers who came. The civilians from their nations maybe followed, and it's most likely they followed them and they settled there. At least some of them, the soldiers settled. Sometimes the soldiers and the people who came after the land had been conquered died there. Think of 200 years of occupation. How many generations? Those people settling there are intermarrying with the locals, so you can see what happens to that local population. The Persians came, as I mentioned. The Greeks under Alexander the Great, and Alexander the Great, city of Alexandria is named after him, so there is that influence. Romans, Mark Antony and Cleopatra, we know this story. The Turks under the Ottoman Empire. The Arabs, we know. The Arabs came, and in fact, up to this point, we can say that the Arabs are the ones who still stay on that land. But we have to be very careful, even when you say, for example, it's the Arabs on the land, it's not that simplistic, because most of these occupations, when they happened, the existing population was not exterminated. We don't have such records in history that some people came and exterminated the local population. Mostly it was maybe intermarriages, and then over time they form a new society and things. So when you start talking of race of ancient Egypt, you have to bear that in mind. And in fact, even when you read Herodotus' histories, he mentions situations of other nationalities, the Greeks in particular, living in Egypt as communities. And the way he describes it seems like they were big communities. They were not just a few migrants who had come. It looks like they were big communities of Greeks and maybe other nationalities that they used to come to Egypt, ancient Egypt, and Egypt that has existed after. In fact, you have to bear in mind that most of the people who've ruled Egypt have been people from outside for a very long time. Even the last king of Egypt, who left power in 1952, just recently, King Farouk, his origins were Albania. He wasn't even an Arab. So that tells you something about Egypt. Egypt is such a complex civilization, if you might call it so, especially when we look at it for thousands of years. Now let's come to the question. And the question specifically is about whether Egypt was black or white, which is a stupid question. Sorry to use that word, because as we've already seen from what has happened, from the things I've explained, Egypt was already a melting pot. Maybe even by the time Herodotus is coming to the scene, it wasn't just, oh, maybe it was, I don't want, this is my own, the way I see it, my own perception, is that I don't think you would have gone there and you'd be like, oh, this is a black people's society, or this is a white people's society. I don't think the ancients even saw it that way. Most likely not, at least going by what I read, what I get by reading Herodotus' histories. But what is possible is that possibly part of the population could be categorized as black, going by today's, you can call it, standards, and part of the population most likely could be classified as white, the Greeks, for example. Now, there are two, I'm going to read two parts of histories where you get the idea that most likely there was a significant population of black people in ancient Egypt. Now, I don't want to say whether they were in power or not. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying most likely there was a huge population of black people in Egypt. More likely they were in the majority, or maybe they were 50. We'll never know. But here is what the first part comes from that exact place that I mentioned earlier, where this part I was talking about, and then the person left me a comment in a video I did a few months ago. And in fact, that person goes ahead to take this part of the book and shares it in the comment section, as if trying to prove that I was wrong, trying to think that ancient Egyptians were black. Or that's the perception he got, that I was trying to say that the ancient Egyptians were black. But that's not the point I was really trying to make. After reading that book, there is no way I will arrive to the conclusion that ancient Egyptians were purely black. But there is a way I will arrive to the conclusion that at least there was a significant population of ancient Egyptians who were dark-skinned and they had woolly hair, as Herodotus writes. Now, here is the part. I'm going to read it, and I'm putting it on the screen for you to read also. For the Colchians were evidently Egyptians, and I say this, having myself observed it before I heard it from others, and as it was a matter of interest to me, I inquired of both people, and the Colchians had more recollection of the Egyptians than the Egyptians had of the Colchians. Yet the Egyptians said that they thought the Colchians were descended from the army of Sesostris, and formed by conjecture, not only because they are swarthy, that is dark-skinned, and curly-headed. For this amounts to nothing, because others are so likewise, but chiefly from the following circumstances, because the Colchians, Egyptians, and Ethiopians are the only nations of the world who from the first have practiced circumcision. Now, Herodotus is talking about his travel close to a river that used to be called River Phasis, and the river later on is called River Rioni. And this river is found in what we know today as Georgia, the modern nation or state of Georgia. And he says when he went there, he meets this group of people, this tribe of people, and he looks at them, and they look dark-skinned, and they have curly hair, which is mostly hair of people of let's say, using today's words, African origin. And he looks at them, and he looks at their neighbors, and he realizes they were so different. And he tried to investigate. Talking to the Egyptians did not remember them, but they told them most likely they were remnants of the soldiers of Egypt who had gone to that part of the world under the leadership of King Sesostris. Now, when King Sesostris went there, he left some army there. These people kind of like settled there. Maybe they intermarried with local women, and they created this new tribe of people. But he said, I wasn't going to say that they were really descended from Egyptians, because there were other people who were dark-skinned, not only Egyptians. But the other thing that made him conclude that they were most likely descendants of Egyptians was that they practiced circumcision. And during that time, only Egyptians, Colchians, and Ethiopians practiced circumcision. That kind of like told him these people are likely linked to the Egyptians. So this person shared this specific paragraph with me. I don't know whether I'm the one who is interpreting it the wrong way, or maybe, I don't know. If you can leave me a comment below and tell me, yeah, you are wrong, you are getting it wrong. This paragraph is not trying to say that most likely Egyptians, or a significant population of Egyptians, was dark-skinned and had curly hair. But me reading it, that's the message I'm getting. Is like Herodotus is saying that was one of the things that made him conclude that the Colchians must have some relationship with the Egyptians, and on top of that, the fact that they were practicing circumcision. Now, the second is about something that Herodotus was told by the priests at Thebes. Now, the priests at Thebes gave Herodotus, or told Herodotus a story, and the story is that there were two women who were stolen from Egypt, and they were taken. One was taken to Libya, which was basically to the west of Egypt, and the other one was taken to Greece and to a place known as Dodona. And these two women became oracles. Now, in the Greek stories that Herodotus had heard, these women were called the two black doves. Now, the two black doves, Herodotus got to know that they were called doves, number one, because when they were taken to this new land, they could not speak the local language. So the people could not understand what they were saying, but over time they came to learn the languages. They were doves because the locals saw them as birds just chirping because they didn't get what they were saying. But they were black doves because they came from Egypt. And I'm going to read the specific part of that book. It reads, my opinion of these things is, if the Phoenician did really carry off the women employed in the temple and sold one of them into Libya and the other into Greece, this last woman, as I think, was sold to some Thesprotians in that part which is now called Hellas, but was formerly called Phalangia. Then being reduced to slavery, she erected a temple to Jupiter under an oak that grew there, nothing being more natural than that she, who had been an attendant in the temple of Jupiter at the Thebes, should retain the memory of it wherever she came. Afterwards, when she had learned Greek language, she instituted an oracle, and she said that her sister in Libya had been sold by the same Phoenicians by whom she herself was sold. The women, I conjecture, were called doves by the Dodonesians because they were barbarians and seemed to them to chatter like birds. But after a time, when the women spoke intelligibly to them, they presently reported that the dove had spoken with a human voice. For as long as she used a barbarous language, she appeared to them to chatter like a bird. For how could a dove speak with a human voice? But in saying that the dove was black, they show that the woman was an Egyptian. So that's a part of Herodotus' book that also gives us a hint that at least a significant part of the Egyptian population was black. So these women are stolen from Egypt. They are made slaves. They go, one becomes an oracle in Libya and the other one becomes an oracle in some part of Greece. And then they call them the black doves, which Herodotus tells us translates to, one, because they could not speak the local language, and two, because they were black and they were from Egypt. Now, maybe I'm also wrong to interpret it that way. You can leave your comment in the section to tell me what you think. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm willing to be corrected and guided. I don't want to claim that I understand everything. But what I will say in conclusion is, when it comes to the race of ancient Egyptians, I think often we have a very simplistic view of it, or we seek to understand it in a very simplistic way. We want to just say, oh, ancient Egyptians were black, or oh, ancient Egyptians were Caucasians. But when you dig a little bit deeper, then you realize, no, it has to be a little bit more complex than that, because Egypt had been occupied by so many people. So many people were attracted to come to Egypt. Not only people from Europe, people from Asia, people from the rest of Africa. So there's no way it's going to be that Egypt was just one race. And even if it was one race, over time, there must have been changes. If you found whatever I said to be interesting, or something came into your mind, feel free to leave me a comment below and I'll respond to those comments. Meanwhile, leave me a like and subscribe so that you don't miss any of the videos I publish. See you in the next video.